Hello, my name is David Hart. I'm the co-director of Nonviolence International. Today, it is my honor to be in conversation with two of NVI's founders, Mubarak Awad and Jonathan Kuttab. All of our hearts are breaking. Our thoughts are with our friends in Palestine and Israel, and especially those in Gaza who are facing particularly harsh bombardment. I am lucky to have the opportunity to ask questions of these two dedicated, smart, and knowledgeable leaders. People I've been speaking with in recent weeks have a mix of emotions. Many of us are angry, sad, and are looking for something productive to do. Even though this video features three men in conversation, we will seek to balance our intellectual analysis with open expression of our feelings. We celebrate those who are lighting candles of hope, even as we must curse this darkness. At NVI, we know that we are not condemned to live in a state of perpetual violence. Through this conversation and all that we do, we hope to raise up a vision of a better future, a nonviolent path to get there. As a Jew studying peace and conflict in college, I read about Mubarak's amazing life and work. To stand now alongside him to promote our shared values is one of the great joys of my life. Mubarak teaches us that creative nonviolence can be used even in the world's most difficult conflicts. For those not yet familiar with his powerful personal story, I urge you to watch this video and also the video linked below where he shares a bit about his inspirational history. Friends, we are recording this video on May 18th, 2021. We are going to discuss current events, and in the midst of this horrific crisis, we will focus on building a long-term vision of a better future and finding a nonviolent path to get there. Mubarak, can you please share with us your thoughts on the current crisis and how we move forward?
It's first, we have to think of those people who lost their lives, and we are saddened with that because we have children, young men, anybody who loses their life. It's not a good moment for them and for their families. To lose a life on something which is, I feel that it's a man-made thing. It's not natural to do that. However, there is also in other places, it becomes a joy for people to take life of someone else, to take people's life. And this is sad for a government or a group to say that we have to kill more. Then they will make me better if I kill more, if I destroy more. And we have to change this mentality that we have. And changing that mentality, it takes the effort of everyone, every child, every man and woman, to understand that life is important. And we as a human being, we are not put on this earth to take someone else's life. And in a religious background that we have between the Muslim, Christians, and Jews, life is important. And why some of those religious groups take each other's life, we have to work on that very, very soon. The situation now in Palestine and in Israel is really affecting a lot of people. And for me, even a lot of people are losing their lives in Gaza and other places. I feel there is something good is happening there. For me as a Palestinian, it is for the first time in my life to see that Israeli Palestinians are joining the effort, okay, to say we are Palestinians. The Palestinians, the West Bank and Gaza, they are our family, and we have to support them. Whatever we can and however we can, we have to support them. And the people are not supporting them with guns. They support them physically by being with them. So they took some buses, some cars, and they drove all the way from Nazareth and from the Galilee area to Jerusalem. They were stopped by the Israeli police and the Israeli army, and they told them to get out of the car. So they walk to Jerusalem. And in their walk, then they find that the news came to the Palestinian in Jerusalem that those people came to support, and they are walking. The Israeli put them to walk, okay, took them from their car. So Palestinian cars came and picked them up, and they opened the restaurant to eat, to let them eat free. They told them that they could stay with them, and that haven't never happened before. And before all the administration with the Palestinians and the Israelis, administration, it was a line that we are not allowed to cross that line to have the Palestinians who are Israeli Palestinians become part of the West Bank and Gaza. And this is a good sign, and I see it as a good sign. However, to understand the ceasefire, if anything happened like that, and if I'm in Gaza, I will not accept any ceasefire without any condition that the Israelis have to break the siege of Gaza. We need to have the water, the sea, the airport, the freedom of movement, that we have to build our part of Palestinian in Gaza. They have the right to make things happen for themselves, not to be in a barrel like fish, and the Israeli anytime they will come and hit them and kill them. And if that doesn't happen, then there is no peace. There's no way of. So whenever you put cats in a corner, any animal or anything, they have to resist. We in Nonviolent International, we love for the people in Gaza to resist in a nonviolent way, but to ask for freedom, it is very difficult to ask Palestinians to resist in a nonviolent way when they don't see any hope in the future. And we have to bring them hope, to bring them support that it has been looked at now in the whole world are supporting them. Even in the cities of United States, there are demonstrations in Germany, France, all over. They say supporting the Palestinian. And it happened before, but not as today. So we have the support. We have the Israelis, even, they are demonstrating to support the Palestinians. Okay, and that shows that there is some hope, yet it's not the majority. We need the majority of the Israelis to see that for the best in their government, to vote for somebody who's interested in peace, not interested in division and destruction of other people's life like Netanyahu.
Thank you. Thank you, Mubarak. Jonathan Kuttab is the co-founder of Nonviolence International. He's a well-known international human rights attorney. He's practiced in the US, Palestine, and Israel. The only person I've ever heard of who practices law in 3 nations in 3 different languages. He was the head of the legal committee negotiating the Cairo Agreement of 1994 and Israel and the PLO. Jonathan, many of us have been deeply moved by your recent book, Beyond the Two-State Solution, and your call for us to help you change the conversation about Israel-Palestine. Rabbi Lynn Gottlieb says about your book, some are trapped by the past. This book opens the gate to the future. If you could please reflect on how the current crisis impacts the suggestions you have presented. There's a lot to learn. I urge you to listen to Jonathan now, and again, go to our website where you'll find an in-depth conversation just about this important book. Jonathan.
Well, I think the current situation highlights the problem. There is a real problem between Palestinian Arab nationalism and the Zionist movement, which wants Israel to be as Francis French, as Jewish as Francis French. My basic thesis is that these two movements are mutually exclusive, and neither of them can conquer and destroy and demolish the other. They have to find a way to live together. And the way to live together is by dropping exclusivity, by saying, what do we need as Palestinians and what do we need as Israeli Jews and Zionists? Can we have both together? Can we live together in a single state that supplies what we need? Right now, it's difficult because one side, at least, thinks it has all the power, and it does. And it has tremendous power, physical power, military power, control over the area, and it's trying to impose its will. If there's anything that's good in this evil, difficult, painful period, it is that they cannot have their will, that with all the power in the world, Palestinians continue to exist, continue to resist, however feebly, continue to be united despite all the efforts at fragmenting them, and continue to survive. Just mere survival of Palestinians, I think, is a hopeful thing. It means that the program that's built on sheer power cannot succeed. We need other methods to resolve issues rather than simply to dominate the other and force them, bend them to our will. I listen a lot to Israeli TV in Hebrew, and all their discussion is, how can we force Hamas to bend to our will? How can we impose so much destruction, including on the infrastructure? How can we target the middle class and the upper middle class areas like Rimal, so that they will force Hamas to do what we want? And the truth is, you can't. You can't, because you are dealing with an entire people. And people, simply, it's the nature of people to resist and to want to be free, even under totally unequal circumstances. And eventually you have to make peace with them. This is basically the thesis of my book. How can we make peace? How can we live together? And we have to live together as equals. We can't live together as an apartheid two-tier system where one party dictates and determines and sets the rules for who you are and where you are and what you can do and what you can't do.
Thank you so much. So friends, as I mentioned, Jonathan's book is available on our website for free. I urge you to read it. I grew up being told of a land taken during a war when the whole world was against us, and still somehow we prevailed. And yes, international law made clear that no nation should occupy land they took in war, but we were defending ourselves, and we certainly would not hold that land for long. Then the story I was told was of an oppressed people eking out a fragile living in a harsh land. Not surprisingly, those people were my people. I wasn't told of the suffering of the Palestinian people. And when I learned of that deep affront to the basic values that all Jews are taught are at the heart of our faith, I was somehow more able to accept this contradiction because it came with a story that the land would be traded for peace and the occupation would end soon. That was decades ago. And sadly, the cruel and illegal actions taken again and again have reshaped facts on the ground and made the call for a two-state solution more of a cover for oppressive policies than a realistic path towards peace and justice. I again urge you to visit our website to see the powerful resources shared with us by our partners. In these hard times, we hope you will take inspiration from the wonderful ongoing work, vital work of our partners. I believe they deserve our active support, and I ask you, Mubarak, to raise up the work of these partners in the region.
It's one of the things that we are very happy is that We have many individuals in the region, and I will name few of those, like we are not number, that they really fight hard to fight for justice, which is so important. We have other which are very much interested in the world community, like uh, for people who want them to bring ships to Gaza so that they would not be blocked by the Israeli for commerce on that. We have people in the Holy Land Trust in Bethlehem that they will train those young people in a way to let them adjust to the situation, but to deal with occupation and in a non-violent way. We have so many other people also, that in Hebron we have the international group in Hebron where they have resources. They are teaching English, and in Israel we have a Center for Jewish Nonviolence, which we, as Palestinians, we help create and we support, and they are having a hard time how to deal with the Israelis themselves as Jews on that in such a situation, and they steadfast that there could be peace in that area. The idea is not that we would have peace, but for anybody to promote themselves by killing others is not a right way of dealing with issues. And even though religion play a big part, but for people to be under occupation for a long period of time, to people to be deprived of their freedom and liberty, and for any man or a woman in a house, when they go and look in their children's faces and they know that they are not free, that they cannot decide what's the best for their children, that they dream of schools, but they might not be able to leave the country to go to school or to have a job. It's destruction of a society. But thanks God for the Palestinians that they are not going to kneel down with all the difficulties that they have, and they are not going to surrender. Surrender is not part of our way of dealing with issues. We will prevail because every Palestinian and every supporters of those people who work with us believe that Palestinians have right. Palestinians are human beings and they deserve freedom like any other person in the world. So the struggle will continue until equality and justice will be really distributed equally in that part of the world for both Israelis and Palestinians.
Thank you so much. So you can learn more about all of these wonderful groups on our website. I will just mention, as I did at the beginning, that our thoughts are with all of those in the region, but especially those in Gaza, because the conditions are particularly harsh always, and especially now. We Are Not Numbers is led by young people who are telling their own stories, and I urge you to come to our website, learn about their work, support all these wonderful groups. Jonathan, I'm concerned about rewriting history. I'm remembering the assassination of the Prime Minister of Israel, and at the time, almost all in my community were horrified by this evil action. But over the years, we've seen hate growing, and now the murderer is considered a hero by some. And I'd ask you to explain this dynamic and consider how the events of January 6th are already being rewritten, and how that could impact the US, how it's impacting Israel and Palestine if we don't find nonviolent, creative ways to challenge it.
Well, this is the power of narrative. When you have a narrative that gets repeated by the media, that is comfortable, that is acceptable within a particular community, then facts are bent to fit within that narrative. And if they don't fit, they are simply ignored. Even what you see with your own eyes, if it doesn't fit within a narrative, it fails. And now we have what's called a single narrative situation. In the United States, you see this more than anywhere else. There is one narrative about what happened in the elections when Trump lost. And if you believe that narrative and you stick to it and you fit everything within it, then you start mistrusting institutions, mistrusting voting, turning other people from friends and neighbors into enemies, because your narrative requires that type of demonization of other people. The ability to listen to more than one narrative, the ability to try and seek facts, and base your opinions on facts rather than interpretations and narratives is a very difficult process. And I think this is one thing that we can teach our children. One of the things about violence is that it silences all other voices. When I pick up the gun, when I demand defense, nobody asks how much does it cost. When I want to build a school, when I want to build a hospital, when I want to build a road, everyone says, I don't know if we have the money. I don't. But when you want to buy a tank or a rocket or a fighter jet, nobody asks. Somehow that closes all other avenues of discussion, and everything goes straight to the violent action. So nonviolence, in a way, is the more rational approach, which allows you to think about different narratives, think about different points of view, consider the other as well as yourself, and arrive at good resolution.
Thank you. One of the things that is challenging for many of us is raising up our common humanity. And yesterday I'd seen a video shared by those wonderful leaders at We Are Not Numbers of a young child coming out of some rubble with a pet fish, and he managed to save this pet fish, and it's heartwarming and heartbreaking at the same time. And today I saw this beautiful child of God, a little girl dragged out of the rubble, and those around are celebrating that she's alive. But Mubarak, anyone who knows you is aware of your lifelong commitment to both nonviolence and to children. Can you speak to the trauma inflicted on young people who experience war?
Well, I can see that when children are part of a conflict or part of war, or even if their parents was shot in front of them, and that I have with my brothers and sister to bury my father in 1948, that affected me all my life. And not a single week without thinking that how I survived, and do I trust those people or don't? Do I see that forgiveness is an important or not, that reconciliation is an important or not? Or should I live on a daily, every day angry and upset about those who killed my father and who were able to destroy my father and shoot him without knowing that he made my mother a widow with 7 children. We have 7 children that didn't make the Jews our friends. They were our friends before my father was killed, but after that, it's so tough. However, my mother pushed hard in telling us that we should not revenge, that we shouldn't carry a gun, that forgiveness is part of our faith and just keep the faith strong, and don't kill a person, because killing a person, you kill a family. And here, when a child in Gaza or in Israel or Tel Aviv, anywhere, that he is killed, that or he is injured or he saw his father or mother killed, he's not going to be the same child. And we have many, many situations that children, okay, when they grow up, they have to make a decision, okay, and nobody can make it for themselves. And that decision is that, do they have to feed the anger, or do they have to feed peace, the peace and love in themselves? And the one you give them more nutrition, is it anger or is it you give it to the peace? And that decision have to be individual peace. But when people get upset and angry on a daily basis or weekly basis, okay, the anger sometimes get overwhelmed and people just frustrated and they use their anger openly. And that's not a healthy situation in a community or in a situation. So what we in nonviolence, we tried hard to tell people to understand that there is problems, that there is conflict, but how we deal with it, with others, with friends, with family, and with to ask, even in the worst situation, to ask forgiveness and to work with those who kill our people, and to also to say it's wrong to kill. And we have to spread that as much as possible. And the Israeli, with all their might, with all their power, they cannot live in peace. We have, as Palestinians, we are the only people who could give peace to Israel, to the Israelis. Not America with all its money, not their guns, not even their atom bombs, not the Arab world, we as Palestinians. And we have that power, and let's use that power to give them peace by letting them understand that we want you to be an equal partner with us to live in this land. This is a holy land. So don't make it a land for war and destruction.
Thank you so much. Jonathan, it's hard for many of us to grasp the self-serving motivations of politicians all over the world. Can you speak to the reasons so-called leaders regularly take actions that clearly are not in the best interest of those they purport to represent?
Well, this is actually a problem of democracy, and it's particularly a problem in the United States, where money plays such an important role in getting elected. And so if you need money to get elected, no matter how idealistic you are, you need to do the right things so that you can get money to be elected to do what you want to do. And therefore you become a slave to money and a slave to power and a slave to those who will allow you to advance your interests. And this is both a positive and a negative. It's a positive in that you owe them, you have to do something for them. And it's a negative because you're afraid of them. Because if you say the wrong thing out of principle, you can be primaried, you can be attacked, you can be accused falsely of anti-Semitism, for example, or maybe correctly, you can be under the microscope and somebody will be able to find something to attack you. So you have to be afraid. And we see this in the United States, we see this in Israel, we see this even among Palestinians, where leaders advance their interest at the expense of their constituency and at the expense of those that they are supposed to serve. This is why democracy is not just elections, it has to be participation. People have to be involved, people have to be engaged, people have to make sure that those who are elected to represent them are actually doing their job, because most of the time they're not.
Yeah, I'm remembering a political campaign I was involved with, and at the end, fired up, wonderful people who are saying, see you in 4 years. And it's that sense that democracy, it's only casting your ballot when it's so much deeper. Mubarak, I have felt that that occupation is corrupting Judaism. I know our faith is built on a commitment to the healing and repair of the world, pursuing the challenge of shalom, and at its core, a celebration of freedom. In every generation, we are called on to feel that we experience the exodus from bondage. Recently, I've seen some of those of my faith chanting hate-filled slogans and seeming to take joy in the destruction of civilian infrastructure and human lives, children of God. Can you speak to the dehumanization that is required to get us to this point?
I think that to be a Jew, you have to be proud to be a Jew, believing in the Torah, in the Bible, and that to follow a Jewish tradition. This is the most beautiful thing, okay, on earth. And it is peaceful. It is a way of life to tell others, I'm a religious person, I'm a very spiritual person, I will not hurt anyone, I am willing to spread justice to all, you know, all those things. The same thing as in Islam and the same thing in Christianity. Somehow, there is a lot of Jews, for example, who don't believe in God, and then they cry loud that God gave us this land. So they're hypocrite. And to have hypocrite Jews full of Israel, that's what makes it bad. We have leaders of Jews who don't believe in God, and they call themselves Jews. We have difficulty understanding, okay, and bringing God to be a real estate agent, that thinking that the land is given to Jews, but not to Arabs or not to Christians or not to Muslims. And this is not God that we want to worship, or we want to adore, or we want to be helpful to understand justice with each other when that is happening. But this is what's going on in Israel. Israel have to have a revival of Judaism, a faith that is so good and lived through many centuries, but now is destroying the core of Judaism in the name of Israel. So Israel is destroying Judaism. That's how I see it, okay? And we have strong rabbis that they have to say, no, that's not Judaism every time. In the Senate, okay, that have to stop. In the House, in the Knesset, it have to stop when people make laws and regulation against another country, against other people. That's not Judaism. So it's a tough to be a Jew in this time, when you can support, if you are support Israel, you are okay. If you don't support Israel as a Jew even, there's something wrong with you. And now, if anybody who's a Christian or Muslim or anybody who doesn't support Israel, it's automatically he or she become anti-Semitic. So Israel is taking Judaism to a point of a political manipulate everybody so that you could support Israel rather than being told anti-Semitic. And that's where we have to stop it.
Thank you. Jonathan, I think there's an important recent development in this long and painful history that many are just learning about or might be confused about. There are two major organizations that have recently declared the occupation to be a form of apartheid. Can you talk about those two groups, where they fit in the landscape, and why it matters?
Well, the two groups obviously are B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights group, and Human Rights Watch, one of the most respected international organizations, not only did they call the occupation apartheid and Israel apartheid, they really looked at the whole framework of Israel and trying to establish a Jewish state that's a two-tiered function. You see, when Israel was first created, the Jews had just survived the Holocaust. They were in desperate need of some kind of place of refuge. There was a lot of sympathy behind the idea of setting up a Jewish state. Now, in retrospect, people are looking at it and says, what does it mean to have a Jewish state? How can a state be Jewish without necessarily discriminating and being racist against non-Jews who it replaced? And the reality, there may be different forms of Zionism, but the form that has prevailed and succeeded has elevated Jewish privilege and Jewish rights and Jewish interests collectively at the expense of non-Jews, which are the Palestinians. And at its very roots, that's a very racist thing. It's like a caste system. You are either Jewish or you're not. And if you're Jewish, whether you're living in Israel, whether you're living in Jerusalem, whether you're living in the occupied territories in the West Bank, whether you're living abroad, you have a special status that is denied to non-Jews who are indigenous and who are living in Palestine, who have been kicked out of Palestine, who are refugees, who are trying to hang on to their lives in Jerusalem, in Gaza, in the West Bank. So the idea of apartheid being a system, a caste system that privileges one people at the expense of another is now coming into sharp focus. This was the whole idea about Sheikh Jarrah. Sheikh Jarrah wasn't about 6 buildings or 10 or 20 families. It was a continuation of a process that the Judaization of Jerusalem, making it Jewish at the expense of non-Jews. To say those things while being careful not to be anti-Semitic, to say those things while insisting on equality has become the new challenge for progressives everywhere. How can you really oppose anti-Semitism and oppose Islamophobia and oppose racism while supporting a Zionist movement that is built on privileging Jews at the expense of non-Jews? So this is really the issue that Israelis and Jews now face. David, I feel for you. I feel for any Jewish person who is aware of Jewish history, of Jewish suffering, of Jewish values and morality, but who are seeing those elements being twisted into supremacy, into privilege, into exceptionalism. Rules don't apply to us because we are Jews. We have power, therefore we can do it. We can even have nuclear weapons because we have suffered from insecurity for ages. We are special. We are chosen. Even the language of chosen people and promised land becomes a very abhorrent tool of oppression and of distinction and of privilege. How can we get rid of that while still maintaining any kind of Jewish identity? I think that's a very serious problem for people to think about and for progressives worldwide to deal with. How can we be supportive of our Jewish brothers and sisters who have suffered millennia of anti-Semitism without at the same time promoting or accepting or even being silenced to their own sense of arrogant supremacy and privilege?
Thank you, friend. One of my earliest political movements I got involved was against apartheid. And then years later, I've been a peace activist, but also a conflict resolution practitioner. And as the CEO of the Association for Conflict Resolution, led a delegation of 50 conflict resolution practitioners from the US to go to South Africa to study their Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I would just ask my Jewish friends, don't let the word get in the way of you understanding what they're talking about. Yes, apartheid was referenced in our minds to what happened in South Africa, but each of these wonderful organizations that Jonathan has described take seriously the definition and hear what they're saying and understand how important it is that we reclaim our Judaism as the force for peace and justice that it must be. Mubarak, Christian evangelicals have invested heavily in supporting the most extreme and racist Zionists. They have built settlements and they've done much more. Yet the peace community fights over pennies. They have invested in hate, and it appears to many of us now that their investments are paying off. Can you reflect on the role of the Christian evangelical movement in this conflict?
It is so sad even that you call them Christians. Those are not Christians.
Say.
They don't follow the Bible. They don't follow Christianity. They became so politically active that their politics entered and shattered their mind in a way of aggression. And even some of them, to the extent they have so much hatred for Jews that they want them to go to Jerusalem so that the Messiah would come back again and the Jews will be killed. And then the rest of the Jews who are not killed become Christian. This is a disaster way of getting the politics and religion mixed together in a statement that we have to help Israel, okay? When really they hate Jews. And that hypocrisy is so much accepted in the United States. Unfortunately, that have been accepted with so many Jewish people and Israelis and say, okay, if they want to give us their money, they could say things bad about us, but we are really, we need their money and we need their support. We need their vote. And they are the one who put Trump in office. And look what Trump did to Israel. He, by himself, as an individual American who became a president, he destroyed the whole concept of peace in Israel and the whole concept of reconciliation between Palestinian and Israelis. And that fellow, he doesn't know it. He's unable to know what he did is wrong. He cannot comprehend that. But the Israelis are using him, and they use him well for that. But that's make the Christian community here a false group of Christians. And that's why I don't like even to call them Christian. They should give their name something else and to take Christ away from their life, and they have to repent. And I mean by repent when they make destructions, okay? And that's when they accept another group to be under occupation and support occupation. That's a very sinful way of dealing with people. To have people leave their homes to be given to someone else, that people will have checkpoints where to go from a neighbor to a neighbor, that their houses have been demolished. And the Christians is hooray. And when in the 67 war, they start rejoicing in the street because Israel was beating all the Palestinians in the 67 war and they won the war. What kind of a Christian that you have that feeling of victory when other people being killed? Where's the mercy? Where's the love of your neighbor? Where's the love of your enemy even? So It's very sad for Palestinian Christians to associate with those evangelical Christians, and it's important for even Palestinian evangelical Christian, to deal with those Christians in the United States and Europe and other parts of the world, that they just blind their eyes to justice.
Thank you so much. Jonathan, there are some new definitions of anti-Semitism now being thrown around. It feels to me like they're being used to limit what is acceptable speech. Could you tell us a little about what's happening and how it impacts this conversation?
Yes, this is a very insidious, deliberate, deceptive manner. It takes advantage of the fact that people correctly want to fight anti-Semitism, correctly want to fight hate speech, correctly want to defend the Jewish people from this scourge of anti-Semitism that's been following them for hundreds and thousands of years. And they take that good impulse and they use it, they weaponize it to support the state of Israel and support the Zionist movement and support everything that's being done by Zionists and by Jews to assert supremacy, to assert exclusivity. So the definition uses anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and as if they were the same thing. So that any attempt to deal with Zionism opens you to the kind of barrage of criticism, of silencing, even of criminalization that anti-Semitism exposes you to. Now, this is not only in the United States, but in Europe, where anti-Semitism is a criminal offense. So then any kind of anti-Zionism becomes a criminal offense. Any kind of support for Palestinian rights becomes a criminal offense. Any kind of speaking out for equality. What do you mean equality? You don't accept Jewish state and Jewish supremacy and Jewish privilege and Jewish rights. The Jews are trying to defend themselves. By trying to stop them, you are being anti-Semitic. And it's both intellectually wrong and morally wrong, but also it's culturally, it doesn't understand that the evil of anti-Semitism has been largely a Christian Western phenomenon. It doesn't mean that Arabs don't have racism or discrimination. Of course they do, but among different groups. But this really evil, toxic, genocidal anti-Semitism has been a Christian Western European phenomena with a history, with economics, with a theology of its own that's been a very toxic and an evil movement. And absolutely everybody should oppose it. But you can't use and weaponize that opposition to anti-Semitism by defining anti-Semitism in a way that relates to Palestine and Palestinians. The curious thing is that in Israel today, classic anti-Semites are welcome in Israel by Netanyahu, as long as they are supporting the state of Israel and the Zionist movement. They're given a pass. My position, of course, is different. My position is that all racism, all discrimination, whether it's anti-Semitism or Islamophobia or any kind of caste system, is evil and wrong. And equality is the ideal. But this using a definition of anti-Semitism that includes a political component of opposition to Zionism and opposition to the state of Israel is an extremely dangerous and insidious thing.
Thank you so much. Mubarak, there are people who are watching the news these days, might be new to the issue, and are hearing some unfamiliar phrases. or might not understand fully how those phrases have been used in the past and how they sound to Palestinians. Can you share with us your thoughts on Israel has a right to defend itself? There has been no substantial overreaction, and we are cutting the grass.
I think this nationalism and the idea of having a flag and the idea of borders, it have to go away. I'm completely against that. I'm more want people, if they want to travel, they have the right to travel to go any place without any borders, without any passport, without being belong to this nation or that nation, because if you have an American passport, you have more privilege than if you have a Bangladesh passport, you know, that you cannot do this, you cannot do that. The world have to educate itself to become a better involved in equality all over. And that's need to take years. We might not reach that in our life, but that's for me. To protect yourself is really when you have peace with your neighbor, when you go and visit with them, and when you have, if somebody is getting married, you will enjoy that marriage of other people and celebrate with them. And this is what we humans, we need. We don't need the separation. We don't need the anger and the frustration that fellow, because he doesn't believe in the same way I believe, or believe in the same God I believe in, or his color is different than mine, there is something wrong with him. And if we as Christian, Muslim, and Jews believe that we were created equal in the sight of God, then that shouldn't be a problem for us. However, we created those division by ourselves to make ourselves, because I am white or because I am black or because I am yellow or because of I am half white and half black, I am better than the other half and better than others. We are not better. And that understanding have to be part of educating children, educating them as small as in kindergarten, that we are all equal. It doesn't matter your face, it doesn't matter what you believe in. We have to love each other and accept that. The other thing that when we are talking about democracy, which has become so sad and so upsetting, also that we give people sad vibes when we tell them you are black, you don't have the same right. If you are a Palestinian, you should not have any democratic thing or you cannot vote. And the Israelis just pressure on Abu Mazen, and the United States pressure Abu Mazen not to have election. Now, then Israel will have election and they fail, and they couldn't have election. They failed 4, 5, 6 times, but they continue having election. We, for 14 years plus, we didn't have election, and then the Israelis, they don't want us to have election. And in this situation where we are in, if there's an election tomorrow, Hamas will win the West Bank and Gaza. Yet Israel would not accept to have a Palestinian state or a Palestinian authority that is run by Hamas in the West Bank and Gaza. So they say no elections. And part of the situation, I feel, is because Abu Mazen dropped a cold bucket of ice water on the Palestinians to say no elections. When it was so excited, the Palestinians want to share, to be human again, to put people in power representing them, to serve them. And that was a destruction. So the war in Gaza, I mean, it had to be blamed, a big blame also on Abu Mazen, not on the settlers, not on Sheikh Jarrah, but he have to be blamed. And to be honest with that, he really missed the boat not to have elections. That's one important aspect. The other important thing that we have to look and see how I could help my neighbor. Not only love my neighbor, how could I help him? I mean, if he's doing something, if he's old, would I bring him food? Would I bring him water? Would I take him to the hospital? That's what we need to encourage, not discourage, not to put walls between us. And the Israelis are the ones who are feeling that if they put walls between the Palestinian and Israelis, that's the end of it. And look what happened. They put a big wall in the West Bank, and they put big walls between Gaza and the Israelis, and it didn't matter. Palestinians will not surrender. It doesn't matter how many. Even it is so sad to tell you that in Gaza, Palestinians feel that they are dead because they have no freedom. They have no ability to improve themselves. Their water is not good to drink. There's no sewage things is going on. You know, all those things. They even cannot go on in the Mediterranean Sea to enjoy fishing. You know, all those things. So they are dead. And when you say, how many times we have to kill them? Say, you cannot kill a person more than one time and he's dead. So we have to make them alive again, make them think and give them hope. And that becomes an important part of nonviolence, an important part of our people who are working with us, that we sponsor them to give life to people, which is important.
Thank you so much. Jonathan, it seems to many of us who've watched the region closely for decades that Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu wanted this escalation. As you know, he's under investigation for corruption, and he seems to be clinging to power using cruel, short-sighted self-interest. I'm remembering how Ariel Sharon used provocations to force situations he then said he had no choice but to respond to. Can you explain about the ongoing pattern of evictions and what it meant to attack the Dome of the Rock with tear gas?
Well, I agree that Netanyahu has been utilizing this situation, but I think we need to understand that it is more than Netanyahu. There is a real shift to the right wing in Israel, a real feeling of we can do it, we are powerful, we have the ability. The international community doesn't matter because the United States will protect us from international law. They will use the veto. The Arabs don't matter because we can go and deal with the top leaders, bribe them, give them weapons, give them deals, and they don't care. Palestinians don't matter because they are fragmented and they are leaderless, basically. And if they do anything, we can crush them because we've convinced the world that this is terrorism and we're there to defend ourselves. So there is a feeling of exceptionalism and there is a feeling of impunity. We can do what we want. And there was a very interesting article in the New York Times that the events in Gaza started a month before when Israeli soldiers went in and cut off the loudspeakers for the call of prayer because that disturbs an Israeli president who was going to give a speech at the Western Wall, at the Wailing Wall. So it says, cut off the loudspeakers. That kind of arrogance, we can do it. We have the power. We will go into the mosque and we will destroy, we will hit, we will go through the streets of East Jerusalem, through the Muslim quarter, waving Israeli flags and saying death to Arabs because we can. That type of arrogance and the hubris of arrogance, that the process of Judaization has been the process of domination. In demography, we bring our immigrants in and we keep their refugees out. Land, we confiscate land and then we make it only for Jews. Houses, absentee property. This land used to belong to Jews, so we'll take it over. But the land that used to belong to Arabs, no, that doesn't matter. This process of turning Israel to make it as Jewish as France is French has been at the essence of the state since its creation in 1948. What Palestinians call the Nakba, the catastrophe, is really a rolling Nakba, is an ongoing Nakba. It continues today. And the reason that Sheikh Jarrah hit such a sensitive nerve is that because there was nothing new about it. It was a continuation of a process that's been going on for a long time, but that now the world is recognizing is an apartheid process, is a two-tiered process, is a process that privileges Jews at the expense of Arabs. And this is at the heart of the problem, and it needs to be addressed. And of course, it's not easy. It's painful. It's not going to end quickly. Just like slavery didn't end overnight, and apartheid didn't end overnight, and colonialism didn't end overnight. It's an ongoing process, but I think the direction is very clear. Justice and equality is, in fact, going to come to Palestine, Israel, whether we like it or not. It's going to be painful. It's going to take time. It's going to take work, but it will definitely come.
Mubarak, when former President Trump and Jared Kushner were announcing these so-called Abraham Accords, I remember you noting that they were not making deals between nations at war, so it was odd to call these peace deals. Can you share with us your thoughts on how the deal of the century, which excluded Palestinian participation, and the Abraham Accords laid the groundwork for this current crisis?
I have a brother, his name is Alex, he's a minister. He wrote just recently an article that, let me talk to Abraham. And he have conversation with Abraham. And in it, he asked Abraham, what you are feeling when your name being used, okay, in destruction and in anger and in hypocrisy. And Abraham said, it is so sad when all the things that I want from people to have justice. The Israelis and the Americans, especially at this time, they use Abraham. You know, it's a very nice name. It's a very nice, peaceful name. But you cannot have peace on one side with one people, okay? It have to be with the Palestinians. And if the Palestinians, you could step on them and kill them and put your knee on their necks and destroy them. And you say, well, they have to accept peace because it's from Abraham. You know, he's a good fellow. Okay, no, he's not. No, that idea is wrong. The second thing, that they thought that with this peace, they could buy Palestinians. Like money is to bring peace, no other thing to bring peace except money. And he openly said that we will give them money, pour a lot of money on them, and they have no choice but to accept them because money is important. Well, they find out that money is not important for the Palestinian. They need justice, they need freedom, okay, more important than money. And this American capitalism that you could buy people with money, that didn't work out. And it is so sad that Trump, as a president, he have no clue what's going on. So he was led by chain on his neck by the Israeli telling him to do this and this and this, and he did it. And to him, he felt so good that history will say he was the best president for Israel. So with all that, it's become sad. Also, it is very sad also the courts, you know, and a lot of other people praise that so much that now we are going to have peace, okay, which was nothing but false alarm. And it is so sad to use religious people's name, okay? Now the next one, they will use probably Jesus accord, you know, to have peace. And then the Jews, they said, well, we cannot have Jesus because we don't believe in him yet. Let's put it a Messiah accord, you know, all those things. And let's not play religion. That's what enough religion have its own problem rather than including political names to say that this is when we'll save the world with religion.
Thank you. Jonathan, many of us have noted that there's an ongoing challenge, and we've tried to get into that some today, but there's some new substantial differences between what is happening today and past wars. Two that I'd love you to give some thought to: the range and impact of Hamas rockets and how that's changing the nature of the conversation, and the sectarian violence within so-called mixed cities. So I ask you to reflect on these new elements, how they change the current situation, and how they change how we will move forward together.
Well, I'll start with the Hamas rockets. And of course, as a nonviolent person, I'm opposed to all kinds of violence, everybody's rocket. The crazy thing is how the press relates to them.
Yep.
They will tell you exactly how many. There's 3,200 rockets that were shot. Well, how many rockets were shot by Israel? How many bombs fell by Israel? And these rockets, I'm not a military person, but I'm told that they're really basically a big tube of metal with maybe some explosives in it. So that even when it hits directly, maybe it makes a hole. And if it falls on somebody's head, yes, it will kill them. These are not really sophisticated, powerful, high explosives that bring down a 15-story building in seconds. So there is just no equivalence between this one and that. What these rockets do, they're similar to Palestinian stones. They hurt, but they are just the expression of somebody who just refuses to give up. And they don't have other tools to resist. I think the Israelis legitimately want the Palestinians to give up. They say, look, we're stronger than you. Look, we can really crush you. We can just bring whole buildings down. We can entirely destroy your infrastructure. And the Palestinians say, yeah, you can, but I'll still resist. I'll still punch back. I'll still try to tweak something to do something. So that's the first thing. What was the second part of your question?
Asking you to think about that sectarian violence within the so-called mixed cities.
That is a really significant thing, because the Israelis have convinced themselves that they have domesticated Palestinian Israelis by giving them citizenship, even though that didn't give them any political power, by giving them a better financial situation than the other Palestinians, that somehow they're quiet, that somehow they can deal with the Palestinians without dealing with the Palestinian Arabs living in their midst. that because they haven't done anything, because they have been docile, because they have not picked up the guns and shot and killed Jews, that somehow we don't have to give them justice. We don't have to give them equality. We don't have to give them genuine participation in political life. They're not allowed to become part of the coalitions that you see, people don't understand that simply giving somebody the vote is not enough, because the Israeli system is built on coalitions. Even the two largest parties together can't form a government. So you always need coalitions. So if you have an unspoken rule that Arabs are not acceptable in a coalition, because this is a Jewish state, we don't want Arab parties, the fact that they have members in the Knesset means nothing, because they cannot be part of the government. They cannot actually influence the politics of the country because they are Arabs, and this is supposed to be a Jewish state. So right now, all of a sudden, these people are saying, no, we are part of the Palestinian people. We demand justice and equality. We feel the pain of people in Jerusalem, in Sheikh Jarrah, and in Gaza, and in the West Bank. We are one people. The fact that you have separated us into citizens, East Jerusalemites, Gazans, West Bankers, and refugees, and tried to deal with each of us separately, you've succeeded so far, but we're still one people. We still care about what happens to us, and we see the illegal, the apartheid structure that you have created. We see it. And we are here to say that it is happening. So this was really shocking, I think, to many Israelis, probably much more so than the Gaza rockets, that these Arabs who are living among us demand equality. And that if they don't get it, they could turn around and kill us or attack us. That's really scary, I think, for the average Israelis. In a similar way that I think white Americans are very afraid of militant blacks who are saying, we count, Black Lives Matter, and we're willing to demand our rights. That's scary for many Americans who think that African Americans are docile. They've accepted their situation. Here they even had a president elected who was an African American. So racism is gone. It's not gone. It's still there. And the demand for equality, the demand for their rights is a legitimate, significant demand.
Thank you. Mubarak, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the United Nations role. I know for many of us who care about the world have put a great deal of hope in the UN to play a productive role. And we celebrate the great work they do through many of their agencies, UNRWA, UNICEF, but we see that the Security Council, which is charged with keeping peace, has a limited impact because of the regular use of permanent members' veto power. So what do you see as the United Nations role, and how could it be improved?
For Palestinians, we have no hope in the UN at all.
There it is.
We have it for so many years and there was no hope. And it's clear that United States, even out of the 15, they are the only one who could veto, and they have been veto for many, many things. And no president and no American in the UN can dare to block or say not to vote for Israel. We have no hope. The other problem is that they make a lot of like the UNRWA and the schools and things like that, the UN, and suddenly they decided to close them, and they decided we don't want to give them money. We they'll start programs, and then suddenly they close them. So it's so sad. So even we don't feel the UN represents all and every country. If you are dealing with other issues, okay, they will be more than happy to support that other countries, but when it comes to Israel, forget it. Israel, Palestinian, forget it. So there's no excitement that any deal comes from the UN. And it doesn't matter if they bring people from the UN to talk to us. It's a nuisance. We don't believe them. We don't believe them. When the United States have a veto power on anything and everything, all countries in the world, they'll come together, but the United States veto them for Israel. What the United States is winning in doing that, it makes itself enemy with a lot of other countries that Israel is a child of the United States. He's a delinquent child, and they let him run in a different direction without control and destroy a lot of things. But when it comes to discipline him, they wouldn't. And that's the veto there. So it's very unfortunate in the history of the UN, and we have to change the rules and the regulations, okay? That not a single country, when they veto, it's completely have no power to make that rules work, even 14-1, but it have to be a majority vote rather than one vote can destroy everything there. It doesn't matter who you are as a US, representing US in the UN. That's like a chapter that nobody, no US ambassador can cross it. So a lot of effort have been working hard with hours and discussions, and it's bunch of anger on the UN that one country control it, and that's US.
Thank you so much.
Another thing that also with the UN, dealing with the UN, also we have to deal with the word, the International Court of Justice. And it's under the UN supposed to believe in the international law. But when the international law come to Israel, United States doesn't believe in that. So the blocks that they are blocking Palestinians, it's like an octopus. And they block us in banks, they block us in business, they block us in industry. And the United States is octopus to support Israel. And until that will go away, then we will have real peace. But as long as the United States have destroying, it will destroy itself in the future. Very sad, but that's how we feel. I feel as a Palestinian.
Thank you. Wherever there is suffering in the world, my heart goes out, but as we've discussed, it feels particularly so in this situation, in part because of my Judaism, but also because when I see those bombs dropping on those children, I think that's my tax dollars at work. So Jonathan, I would ask you to speak to two dynamics. There's been a tradition of something like recently $3.8 billion of our tax dollars from the US each year going to Israel. And there's a changing dynamic as more and more young people especially are coming to see Palestinians as fully human and fully deserving of the rights due to all people. Can you speak to the US role in this conflict and what citizens of the US can and should do to change that?
Well, the US has played a central role in this conflict from the beginning and continues to do so. Unfortunately, it's a negative role. It's not a positive role. They claim to be an honest broker, but everybody knows they're not. They're totally biased to one side. And I think the biggest part of that role is not the money that they send. They send billions over to Israel. It's not the weapons that they send. They are committed to maintaining the balance of power totally on Israel's side. It's not the trade. It's mostly the political role of immunizing Israel from international law and international public opinion. Israel lives in a bubble, as if there is no such thing as international law, as if there is no such thing as international public opinion, as if there is no such thing as human rights regulations, as if there's no international criminal court, because the United States has supported them in their feeling of impunity. We can do whatever we want because the US has our back and will prevent the world or the Arab world or the region from impacting us. And I think to myself, what happens when that bubble bursts? What happens when that total support lags? What happens when the United States abstains instead of vetoing a UN Security Council resolution? Israel will be left alone, truly alone, to face the entire world, to face the reality, to face the region, to face Palestinians. So if I were an Israeli, I'd be very worried. I'd be very worried. I would not be very happy with the type of support that the United States gives, because at some point, sooner or later, the interests of the United States as an empire, as a superpower, is going to conflict with Israel. And what do you do then? Because, mark my words, the United States will do what's good for the United States. Now, when they had the Iran deal, they didn't care that Israel didn't like it. They had the Iran deal and they did it. Now, Trump pulled out of it. The President Biden may come back into it. And of course, the pro-Israeli, pro-Zionist forces, the Christian Zionist forces in this country are ensuring that the United States will continue to support Israel. But for how long? Forever is a long time. It's not going to happen forever. And when that changes, when that happens, Israel will have to face the music. And my point is, Israel needs for its friends to tell them, this is wrong. What you're doing is not sustainable. What you're doing, you need to make peace with the Palestinians, with your neighbors, and with the people of the Middle East, not just with the top leaders who will give you supposed peace in return for an arms deal with the United States. Because the people still can see what's happening, and the people need to make peace with you rather than the leaders. So the United States has a very important role to play. Unfortunately, right now, the United States is part of the problem, not part of the solution.
Thank you so much. So I have a few closing action items that I want to ask of all of you, but first I'll come back to each of our wonderful speakers and ask that you give us your closing thoughts. First to you, Mubarak.
Well, I really have difficulty with a country that its Supreme Court or its judges, they are all supporters of a country of apartheid, which is like in Israel. And that is personal for me because I was in front of the High Court in Israel. And for a Palestinian, I never ever thought that I have hope or right or justice in the Israeli court. And they show it to me from day one. Okay, you could say whatever you want, you could have your argument, you have your best attorneys, and but I have no hope as a Palestinian. On top of that, I have no hope as a Christian in a Jewish court. They make it very clear that this is not a court for everyone. It's only if you are a Jew, you will have justice, but you are not a Jew, you are Christians. So I didn't get any hope or justice in a Jewish court. Also, as an Arab, I speak Arabic. I didn't have hope that there will be justice in an Israeli court. And that's the highest court of the land. Multiply that by so many courts around Israel, so many institutions around Israel, so many government buildings in Israel that they wouldn't allow a Palestinian, a Christian, or an Arab, okay? I have to wait in line for everything when a Jew doesn't wait in line. Sometimes I wait 4 hours, 5 hours. At the airport, a few times when I have to leave or come, okay, I have 6 hours or 8 hours or 9 hours. And they treat me as I'm not a human being. I have my children a few times who came and I have to meet them at the airport. And the Israeli will tell them, your dad doesn't love you. He's not outside. And they will detain them for 5, 6 hours. And they were 8 and 6 years old, So when you are talking about justice, about being a human, and they want to take that humanity out, that they cannot take it away from us. They take it out of themselves, that the Israelis are not human anymore in their dealing with Arabs. And that becomes a problem for them, a problem of conscience, a problem of understanding, a problem of humanity, how they could deal with that, and they go home and hug their daughter or their wife or their husband when they deal with us. And that's going to create, from my point of view, a lot of tension in the homes. A lot of Israelis have to commit suicides to get out of this situation, and they do. And they have to close their eyes and to put like a horse behind their eyes, something that they have not allowed to look left or right. And we want to take those blind spots from them and to let them see that. And openly, I was represented by Jonathan and by the best Jewish attorney in Israel that he never lost a case in the high court. And he never ever believed that he would lose my case, but he lost it. And he lost it because I'm a Palestinian. So the change is not only on top of politics or in the UN. You see, the change have to be in so many areas that we are treated bad and not just and not equal. So that's where I push hard for our people who support, who are sponsoring, whom we are our sponsors, is to fight for those three things: to end occupation, to be free, and to work for justice. And they are working on that, and I hope people will get in touch with those people that we are sponsored. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Jonathan, your closing thoughts?
Well, it's kind of difficult to give a general view of a very, very sad situation. When the bombs are falling, and when Gaza is under siege, and when the West Bank is under occupation, and when Israeli Palestinians are feeling inequality, the worst thing is to lose hope. The worst thing, and I see this among Palestinians, and I see this among Israeli Jews who say, "In ma lasot," there's nothing to do. That sense of despair, that sense of hopelessness, that sense of this is the way it is. You can't fight City Hall. The forces marshaled against you are too powerful and you give up. I think that's the worst thing that can happen. The biggest thing that people need in that area is not money, is not medical supplies. It's hope. Hope. So we need to maintain a sense of hope. And hope doesn't mean optimism. I'm not optimistic. I don't think that Israel is going to lift the siege anytime soon. And I don't think that even with the arrest and imprisonment of Netanyahu, things are going to necessarily improve. Hope means a belief that human beings are basically decent. If you're a religious person, hope means that God is still sovereign in the universe. That the situation will, in fact, improve as it has in many places throughout the world. Hope means taking the larger view and knowing that in the end, people can and do live together in peace. That fighting and war is really the exception, not the rule. Most of the time, people live in peace. Most of the time, people are decent. Now, the news only pinpoints the exception. When there's a crime that's committed, that hits the news. But when for a whole year, that particular store that was robbed in a criminal offense was a center of community life and gathering and decency and generosity. People don't think about that. They just think about the one bad thing. And I say we need to maintain hope. We need to create the situation where people can think and dream about a better life together.
Thank you. That is a wonderful place to bring us to a conclusion. I'm reminded of a quote by the great William Sloane Coffin, and Reverend I got to work on with many peace issues. He said, hope is a state of mind unconnected to the state of the world. The opposite of hope is not pessimism, but despair. Hope keeps us persistent, even when there seems to be little reason for optimism. So I thank you all for listening, and I ask all who hear our words to open your hearts to our shared humanity. We know this is a complicated set of issues, and even with this in-depth conversation, we're just scratching the surface. We hope we have whet your appetite for further study and action. I'm going to place a few key links in the video description on our website, depending on where you're watching this video. I ask you, please read Jonathan's visionary book and consider what you want to do to create a better world. I've been a serious student of conflict resolution, both as an undergraduate and graduate student, and one of my professors, the great Luke Kreisberg, wrote a book on intractable conflicts and their transformation. And he studied so many human-caused conflicts and noted that when we declare conflicts intractable, they become intractable. But when we talk about levels of tractability and think about how we build trust and change them, we can and have over many times transformed what we perceive to be intractable conflicts. So at Nonviolence International, we say to you today that we are not condemned to live in a state of perpetual conflict. If you don't like the situation in the world today, do something about it. We know the world can be better than it is today. We celebrate that there is a youth-led global nonviolent movement of movements growing all over the world. They are claiming their future, and we are going to support them in every way we know how. We ask you to take these significant action steps, come to our website, learn about these wonderful partners, but also sign our statement on changing the conversation and moving forward together. We hope if you found some value in this video, you'll share it with others. And again, support our partners. They are doing important work in very difficult situations, and they deserve our active support. Now more than ever, we ask you to do whatever you can to demonstrate your love of peace and of all people. I thank you for watching. I thank you, Mubarak and Jonathan, for sharing your wisdom and your warmth.
Thank you.